Hey, I'm George, and you're listening to Future Mix Podcast. Xhosa Cole is a critically acclaimed saxophonist, flautist, and composer. An emerging name on the UK scene, Xhosa was the recipient of the BBC Young Jazz Musician of the Year award in 2018, and has since performed alongside artists including Monty Alexander and Courtney Pine, and as a soloist for the BBC National Orchestra of Wales. He's had the opportunity to perform at prestigious venues and events, including the BBC Proms, Birmingham Symphony Hall, and Ronnie Scott's, and in 2020 received the Parliamentary Jazz Award for Best Newcomer, as well as having been nominated for the Jazz FM Breakthrough Act. In January 2020, Xhosa completed his inaugural 23-date UK tour with his quartet. The band recorded his debut album, Know Them, Know Us, alongside featured guest artists, saxophonist Soweto Kinch and pianist Reuben James. As a recording artist, Xhosa featured on Kinch's latest album, Black Peril, where he played alongside African-American jazz titans, drummer Gregory Hutchinson and pianist Eric Lewis. Xhosa also recorded saxophone for UK R&B singer-songwriter Mahalia on her critically acclaimed debut album, Love and Compromise. Although the majority of Xhosa's creative output is centered around the jazz idiom, from free improv to bebop, he's recently begun to break through as an up-and-coming composer. I caught up with Xhosa over the phone late in the evening. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
I kind of got started in music and the arts, originally through dance with a company called African Cultural Exchange, where we used to infuse traditional West African dance with contemporary dance as well, and it was kind of a full multidisciplinary experience where we had live drummers and stuff. And then I got my foot in the door with music when I started at Andy Hamilton's Ladywood Community Centre Music School, where I used to have really cheap lessons. I think there was something like £2.50 or something, and got started straight on the tenor, which I was able to kind of take through into secondary school with some of the free music service lessons that we had and orchestras and things like that. And I really got kind of sucked into the classical world for a time. I found like playing in wind orchestras and playing in full orchestras as a flautist, the experience of being in that full immersive sound, something that I kind of couldn't live without in a way and was really inspired by. But then speaking to one of my teachers, Percy Pursglove, who used to run the jazz line sessions, he kind of, when I told him I was planning on studying classical sax at the Royal Northern School, he was like, man, what you want about? You got to go and study jazz, man. That's where it's at. And I haven't kind of looked back since, to be honest with you. Jazz has always been at the heart of the stuff I was doing, and I was planning on kind of doing a bit of both. But I think with the jazz thing, it's so all-encompassing that you can kind of really look at anything through that lens. And for me, it's kind of been a foot in the door to study and explore many different things: history, politics, art, classical music, African music, diasporic music, Latin American music, American music, pop music, so it's kind of been the lens through which I've kind of come to, or I'm starting to come to some understanding of, this planet and its people. So yeah, jazz for me is it has a lot within it, but primarily for me it's been a huge kind of lens to see things through.
I didn't know that you'd started with the dance stuff and then transitioned to music.
This is the thing, man, like historically these art forms are all interlinked: drama, poetry, art, dance, theatre, it's all, they're all really, they're not, historically they've not been set into distinctions and categories and formally like that. And for me, it's my oldest brother's still involved in the dance world. The most successful dancers have their foot in the door with music, and the most successful musicians that I know have at least can do a two-step or have got some kind of physical manifestation of the music, because it's all expression and it's all intention and it's all groove, man. So yeah, even within poetry and drama and stuff. So yeah, I feel very grateful to have had that kind of foot in the door with the dance thing early on, and I kind of go back to it every now and again and go and see them and take part in some of the classes sometimes.
Yeah, you mentioned your brother involved in dance. Is this a big family thing to you? Do you have other relatives who pursued the music career?
My oldest brother kind of set the precedent. We're very lucky to have a family and parents that kind of encouraged us to pursue many different things. So we were into our sports and whatnot as well. So, but the arts was something that, is such an enriching thing to partake in. We kind of caught the bug really, and it's kind of the second generation, working class Black British kind of vibe where we can have access to some of these resources to be able to engage in this stuff. So, a lot of the things that me and my brothers engage in, our dad never had the opportunity to engage in, but he made sure that we kind of had access to those things while they were readily available and properly funded, of course.
Absolutely. As a composer, how do you find that life as a touring musician and a successful jazz player fits in with the work that you've been doing? I've been listening to your Greek suite, and I can hear a lot of improvisation-based areas within there.
I think the best way to describe it is kind of, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a lens really. So the improvisation thing and the composition thing, they're all different modes of study, but of the same thing, and different lenses through which to see the same thing. This music thing is so vast and diverse. For me, composition is a chance to explore particular approaches, or sometimes harmonic or rhythmic or textural things. But improvisation has always been a key element of compositions, partly because I'm just too lazy to completely through compose stuff, but also because there's something about giving yourself and musicians a chance to take music in different directions that kind of is thrilling to me. And I kind of started off when I didn't really understand, the process of jazz or improvisation. I was like, well, hang on a minute, why don't those guys and girls just write all the music, because surely they'd have time to edit things and to make it better and perfect. And now I'm kind of swung too much the other way, where I'm like, why not improvise everything? Because we've spent so much time practicing and getting it together that it actually makes sense to give ourselves, this music's about freedom and individuality and expression, and it makes sense for us to in some way kind of strive for that in its purest form. So it's kind of, I find it's a bit of a tightrope to juggle between the two. But
I was speaking to a composer called Sebastian Winter a few episodes ago, and the topic came up of inspiration and how you need to practice composition, and he does a certain amount of writing every day that just gets binned, probably 95% of it, but it is a process, just like practicing an instrument. And improvisation, again, the same thing, isn't it? It's not just standing there and being spontaneous and something comes out. It's something that has to be kind of honed as a craft, isn't it?
Absolutely, man. And I think the thing is, sometimes as artists, we think, it's funny, I was speaking to my landlady about this the other day, if you're an artist and you put so much effort into a particular craft, you hold yourself to that standard in every other thing that you approach artistically, but we don't often give ourselves the kind of time and space to develop. If I'm a person who spends however many hours a day practicing, improvising, or, playing the saxophone, and I barely write at all, why would I expect the same kind of level or standard? That being said, there are obviously so many interconnected skills that cross over the boundaries, and one definitely informs the other, but there are specific skills involved in composition, one being the editorial process, the process of making decisions, and the process of setting parameters within which to create music. And as people who improvise, and there's a real liberation in giving yourself and your whole self to a performance or a jam session or just a play with people, but ultimately that's kind of left in the room and you don't have time to make any take-backs. Whereas in composition, making take-backs is a huge part of the process.
Do you like to record yourself improvise and then come back to it and take bits from it, or are you very sort of, this happened in the moment and the moment has passed?
I kind of switch between the two. I'm wanting now to do kind of more recording and get a bit more of a clear understanding of my playing and my identity voice-wise, because I feel like it's something that I give out a lot but don't often sit on the other end and try and put myself in the position of, the people that I'm trying to engage with, the audience members and people who are listening and stuff, and family and friends. It's like, okay, as much as this is, me offering, I've got to make sure that the thing that I'm offering is what I'm
or the thing that's being received lines up with the thing that I'm trying to offer, and that means, holding ourselves to account and not being motivated by the wrong things, not being motivated by insecurity or fear, but rather, love and compassion and empathy. So I think it's an ongoing process of trying to establish that, cementing the relationship between your identity and your expression. And I think that's an ongoing process. Although I do believe that for some of the greats, because their sense of identity was so strong, their expression couldn't be anything less than their identity, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Who of the kind of greats you mentioned there, who was your biggest inspiration in the jazz field or in the music field in general?
To be honest with you, Sonny Rollins is kind of the person that has always resonated very strongly with me. And it was only kind of a little bit down the line that I found out that he was from St. Thomas, or rather his mother was from St. Thomas, and his parents were from the US Virgin Islands, which are part of the Caribbean. And then it kind of clicked, because there were obviously bits of my cultural heritage that were connecting me to this player whose cultural heritage has some of its roots in the same places. So it was like, a connection moment. And likewise for Thelonious Monk, who grew up in San Juan Hill, Sugar Hill, which had a 23% Jamaican population in the early 20s. So there's a lot of cross-pollination musically and culturally and identity-wise, and when someone's expression is resonating with a part of your identity, it gives you a strong connection to them. The Greek Suite was a commission made, I believe, in 2018 as part of the Ideas of Noise Festival. This is a festival that was this inaugural year, actually, and I was commissioned to write some music for it. It's a festival that celebrates noise music, sound music, free improvisation, improvised music, free jazz, really many things within the experimental field, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary kind of works. And I had the chance to compose some music for my older brother, actually, for one of his dance productions. And this was for string quartet, and the person who was playing lead violin, Sarah Farmer, was also leading this festival. And she, although we composed stuff for my brother, she thought there was a lot more that we could do, and so she was very, very generous in commissioning me to expand and develop the work and create something specific for this festival. And I had string players in mind, some classical, some contemporary classical, and Sarah Farmer and Richard, who were more free improvisers. And I kind of wanted to write specifically for them, but also kind of, for me, this composition kind of embodies some of my approach to composition, which is just a bit of a mishmash and kind of taking different ideas and gluing them together and sellotaping them, kind of as a musical collage in a way. I always aim to find some sort of cohesion, either in improvised sections or also within the written sections as well. But in many cases, each of the different sections was kind of written separately, and then after the fact kind of literally sellotaped together the day before our first rehearsal. So yeah. And then the inspiration on this one, I've always been kind of fascinated by the pantheon of Greek mythology and the stories that are, although under the guise of, deities and whatever, really are an epitome of expression of humanity and our strengths and our weaknesses and our flaws and our compassion and violence and romance and everything in between, basically. So I was just revisiting some of that stuff from a more academic point of view, and it kind of
led me to creating some of the different sections within the composition.
Is there like a overarching story behind the suite?
Not so much an overarching one. There are a few different kind of, not movements, but themes that are kind of associated with different stories. So there's a great story of Narcissus and Echo. Echo being a nymph and Narcissus, I think, was just a human. And Echo, for some reason, I think she'd done something or had something done unto her, which caused Aphrodite to kind of essentially curse her. And the curse that she put upon her was that Echo could only repeat back what others had said to her. And then anyway, Narcissus was, there's many men and women from in the Greek mythology that are said to be, the most beautiful, perfect or beautiful looking, aesthetically pleasing characters. And Narcissus was one of these. And anyway, Echo fell in love with this guy, Narcissus, but they had a conversation, and she could only repeat back. But there was this beautiful kind of dialogue that happens where he would end a sentence in a question and she would kind of repeat it, or repeat the end of it, specifically as a statement. And there's this kind of this relationship that, basically unrequited love. Anyway, then Narcissus kind of sees himself in a lake and turns into the Narcissus flower, which is kind of stooped over because he can't stop looking at himself, basically. So talk about vain. But that specifically, there's a interplay between the second violin and the cello, whereby the cello represents Narcissus and the violin represents Echo, and these themes are kind of repeated but are recontextualized depending on what one another are playing, or maybe they're played in a different position, or maybe the rhythm is repeated but the harmony has changed, and there's kind of this interplay between, or dialogue between major and minor, yearning as well as yearning and longing, basically. So that was one of them. And then there was other bits that was kind of more general. There was a theme that kind of built up, which was representative of the Titans, which were, I believe, I think there's 12 or so children of Gaia and Kronos, or maybe Kronos is one of the Titans. Maybe it's Uranus and Gaia, Uranus being the sky and Gaia being the earth. And then the Titans are basically the predecessors to the Olympians, which is, your classic Zeus's, Athena's, all those guys.
The whole kind of Greek mythology has, I remember studying it at school, and you can see how many modern day stories are kind of inspired by a lot of these kind of ancient myths and tales and stuff.
It's folk culture, in the same way that classical music is influenced by folk music, and jazz music is obviously folk music, and by extension of that, or blues music is folk music, and by extension of that, R&B, funk, disco, grime, these are all extensions of folk music. Our idea of storytelling now through films, it dates back to folklore, and the Greeks. There are many kind of archetypes of character developments that we see within Greek that are then taken on by the likes of people like Shakespeare, who refine them into more specific narratives that then make their way into, contemporary modern culture, popular culture, Western culture, in the guise of like Hollywood blockbusters, basically. So,
could you ever see yourself writing scores for films and plays and that kind of thing?
Well, to be honest with you, like when I wanted to get into music, I wanted to get into film music, because within film music, there's this precision emotionally where the composers have a real strong, popular film composers have real specific, techniques that they will use to evoke particular emotions. And those techniques are then, there's kind of a feedback loop, because the films then reinforce those specific cadences and harmonies and it comes a spiral. But anyway, in the first instance, film music is epic. You know what I mean? It's optimized in a musical sense. It's dramatic. It's there to enhance a filming experience. And I've always been a big fan of cinema and the immersive nature of it. It's always been a bit of my escape, more so than TV. And yeah, I would love at some point to engage in that stuff, definitely, but principally in the first instance, it was kind of, I wanted to play that music just because I love the sound of it, and I love the idea of contributing to some much wider immersive experience, in the same way that I've always loved singing in choirs, although I don't often get to do it, because I find that in that context I'm able to contribute to a much bigger force, and in some way that's a really nice place for us to be, from a sense of self, rather than us projecting our sense of self. We're contributing to a larger sense of self that's connected with other people.
Any plans for you in the near future as things start to open up? What have you got in the kind of penciled in? Have you got anything coming up soon?
Yeah, I mean, it's all penciled, isn't it, really? Yeah. This will definitely be after this airs, but performing at Kansas Smitty's tomorrow, celebrating the music of Lester Young, the Lester Young trio with Buddy Rich and Nat King Cole, alongside Joe Webb and Jason Brown, which is going to be a real treat and a learning experience. And then just trying to keep busy, and there are different things. I've put together this animation I've co-directed this animation alongside an amazing visual artist, Shi Lee, which is called Stationary Peaceful Protest, which kind of explores themes around the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically the marches that took place in May of last year. But man, being back in university and really catching the vibe and checking in with everyone has been kind of a bit of a boost for me. I feel saturated in inspiration, and looking forward to getting back to Birmingham and just putting this inspiration to good work and shedding, basically, because it's you can think you're getting on with stuff, but then you have classes with people and you discuss things with people, or you check what other people are doing, and it's like, man, there's a lot to be getting on with.
Thanks to Xhosa for joining me for episode 5. It's always eye-opening to hear him talk about anything. The Greek Suite was written by Xhosa Cole and performed by Sarah Farmer, Helena Britton, Richard Scott and Victoria Groves. Now, we've only got one more episode left in this series, and I very much hope you'll join me for that. In the meantime, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and support our Patreon page. Oh, and leave us a 5-star review, please.